The following stories tell the tale of three bizarre college student cold cases. We have a young woman who disappeared after her car broke down on the side of the road, a girl who disappeared as if out of nowhere leaving her job early, and one last college student who left home dressed in a Halloween costume and excited for a party, only to never be seen again.
45 years ago this week, a woman was found murdered in a cornfield in Morgan County. And this morning, the family of Ann Harmier is still searching for answers. They spoke with Fox 59's Max Lewis about their renewed push for justice and finding her killer.
20-year-old Ann Harmier was a beautiful and talented young woman, just starting her junior year at IU, majoring in theater.
Ann was so young and had the whole rest of her life to look forward to when it was taken from her for seemingly no reason at all. And what makes matters even worse is that her family still doesn't have the justice they need to have a sense of closure over this devastating loss.
I always tell people that Anne had a sparkle about her, a certain quality that you don't find in too many people.
But this aspiring actress would never get to live out her dream.
On September 12th of 1977, Anne was heading back to her college campus located in Bloomington, Indiana, after spending the weekend in her hometown with her friends and family. But Anne would never make it to her destination. She didn't arrive for her class, something that was unlike her, nor did she ever call her mother in the evening, as she had planned to. Her mom became worried, and eventually Anne was declared missing. It was up to the police to find out what could have happened between her hometown and the IU campus. Missing posters were hung around town, and a reward was set for anyone with any information about where Anne could be.
About 2 miles north of Martinsville, her car broke down along State Road 37. Police later found it with its hazards flashing and the doors locked, but Anne was nowhere to be found.
How could Anne have just disappeared without a trace? Could someone have seen a vulnerable young woman on the side of the road and decided to take advantage? News spread quickly of Anne's disappearance, and the community came together to search for her. Unfortunately, the search efforts ended with a horrifying discovery by the police.
5 weeks later, in a cornfield several miles from where her car was abandoned, police found Anne's body. She had been tied up, gagged, raped, and strangled with a shoelace.
The the service was held in this tiny Presbyterian church in Cambridge City, and it was just completely packed.
Understandably, the Indiana University campus and the entire Indiana community were shocked and horrified by what had happened. There was a killer on the loose, and there was no telling who might be next. The story dominated the news, as shown here.
The story of Ann Harmier shocked the Indiana University campus 3.5 years ago. She was a drama student who mysteriously disappeared one September morning, driving back to Bloomington from her home in Cambridge City. There was a wide search with posters and bumper stickers and flyers, all asking, "Where is Ann?"
Despite there being such a huge amount of public interest in this case and lots of pressure on the police to determine a suspect, there simply wasn't the same sort of technology then that we have now. The resources police had to go off of were limited. They looked into many different suspects, from local sex offenders to convicted killers, and even Ted Bundy. They did have one prime suspect at the time, a man named Stephen Judy. Stephen had killed a mother and her 3 kids back in 1979.
The similarities with Stephen Judy's crimes were striking, says State Police Detective Gerald Connors, who headed the search for her slayer. However, Judy was in the Marion County Jail when the co-ed disappeared on September 12, 1977, and this crime remains unsolved.
He was a suspect. I will say that. He was. Early on, like I explained to you earlier. From talking to the people that were actually at the immediate time of it involved in this thing, and I talked to a couple of them this morning about certain things that I wanted to be clear on again. I don't think he was involved in this.
So, if Stephen Judy didn't do this, then who did? Was the real killer going to get away with this forever?
Connor says the Ann Harmier case is still open and her slayer is still very much alive.
That news clip was from way back in 1981, and since then there have been very few updates in this case. Steve and Judy was executed that same year for the other murders, and if he did possibly have anything to do with Ann's case, we may now never know. As you can imagine, these horrific events took the greatest toll on Ann's family members who never fully recovered from the loss.
The killing made headlines and traumatized a community. It's something Ann's cousin Scott Burnham, who was just 10 at the time, will never forget. He's now one of the few family members Ann has left.
After Ann died in 1977, my Aunt Marjorie had just completely given up, and I think that she was just emotionally exhausted, and I think it took a physical toll on her, and she actually died a few years later in 1983.
It may have been decades since Ann's murder took place, but Scott hasn't given up on finding justice. He remains dedicated to the case and thinks that with new technology, it may be possible to at least identify Ann's killer. But could they even still be alive?
Scott took a renewed interest several years ago after reading reports of cold cases being solved using new DNA technology. He reached out to Indiana State Police and stays in regular contact with them as they continue to test evidence found at the crime scene.
I do know that they, test certain objects regularly to find out if they could scrape some DNA, and that they haven't had any success.
Scott is aware that some people still think that Steve and Judy could have been involved with what happened to Ann, but he believes the killer is still out there and that somebody must know something.
Scott says for the longest time, police believed Ann was killed by Steve and Judy, who was sent to the electric chair in 1981 for raping and murdering a young mother and then killing her 3 kids. Records have since shown he was in the Marion County Jail on an unrelated charge when Ann disappeared. As Scott waits for DNA technology to improve, he's hoping more attention on the case could provide new leads.
Obviously, somebody knows something, and maybe more than one person knows something, so getting them to come forward would be a big break.
If Ann's life hadn't been taken from her, she would be 65 years old this year. This is a picture of her, taken long ago on one of her birthdays as she blew out the candles on her pink birthday cake that her mother made for her. It was shared by a public Twitter account that was created in hopes of spreading awareness about Ann's case and hoping to gather information from anyone who knows what happened to her. It's called Who Killed Ann? Ann's case may have gone cold, but her memory is kept very much alive by all those who love her and who are seeking justice on her behalf. If you thought this cold case was truly bizarre, wait until you hear about this next one.
We are following up on information that is received in relation to a major unsolved case in our community. I am able to confirm that we are in fact looking for human remains and have brought in resources to assist us with our investigation. These resources include forensic investigators, cadaver dogs, a mini backhoe or excavator, and the medical examiner's office is still here as well.
You've been here since Thursday. We've seen backhoes go in there. We've seen medical examiners. Can you paint a picture of what it looks like back there right now?
Well, again, we're searching for evidence, and our investigators, the RCMP and Halifax regional police investigators, are searching for evidence, and we're going to be here for as long as it takes.
Kimberly Marie McAndrew was born January 17th of 1970 in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She was one of 6 siblings and had a good childhood. She was known for being very kind and sweet and a little shy while in public. But when she was at home around her close friends and family members, she allowed her silly, fun side to shine through. She had a small group of close friends and loved to laugh with them. She also loved music, especially Bryan Adams. She was a bright young college student who was attending Dalhousie University. She was known to be a good student who made sure to hang out around the right crowd. 19-year-old Kimberly worked as a cashier at the local Canadian Tire. She was a hard-working employee. employee there. On August 12th of 1989, it was a particularly slow day at the Canadian Tire, so much so that Kimberly's supervisor allowed her to head out early at around 4:20 p.m. This worked out great for Kimberly because she had plans that evening. She was going to the Halifax Busker Festival with her family and friends and had arranged to be picked up at 5 p.m. It was also Kim's boyfriend's birthday that day, so she was really excited for the celebration. There was going to be fireworks, magicians, and a lot of fun. At the time, all she had was her work bag, and she left the rest of her belongings in her Halifax apartment. She clocked out and then headed out to the back parking lot, and then seemed to vanish. A short time later, Kim's sister arrived at the Canadian Tire to pick her up, but she wasn't there, and she hadn't contacted any of her other family members. This was incredibly unusual for her and caused her family to immediately become concerned with some sort of harm that could have come to the girl.
She didn't like being alone while she was out and about. In an August 2014 interview, her younger sister Megan explained to the Global News, quote, "Kim was not a girl that went off on her own at all. She didn't even like walking downtown Parsboro by herself."
Kim's father happened to be an officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He retired the same month that his daughter went missing, but his work was far from over. He would dedicate his whole life to trying to figure out what could have happened to his daughter.
There's a plethora of questions, though perhaps one which stands out starkly in terms of the circumstances surrounding the last day Kim was seen. How does a young woman who doesn't walk off on her own, even in her small hometown, end up vanishing in broad daylight from the busy streets of Halifax? Halifax is the capital of the province of Nova Scotia and stands in direct contrast to the small town of Parsboro with a population of over 400,000. That's more than 300 times the population of Kim's hometown.
This whole disappearance didn't make any sense to Kim's friends or family. It was so unlike her. It seemed pretty clear that Kim wouldn't have just simply disappeared out of her own accord. Someone had to have taken her. After all, it's not like Kim would have been a match for someone bigger and stronger than she was. She was only 5 feet 5 and weighed about 110 pounds. A $5,000 reward was set for anyone with any information regarding Kim's disappearance. Kim's apartment was just a short walk from the apartment where she lived with her sisters, but she wasn't comfortable staying there alone. This points even further to how much of an introvert she really was. If her sisters were ever going to be away for the night, she would go back to her parents' house to sleep.
Kim was not an adventurous type and preferred the safety and comfort of being with friends and family. Her sister Megan further expanded on this, defining her sister by saying she wasn't a risk taker and, quote, "There was no way she was just off doing something independently."
Police had little to go off of besides the fact that Kim clocked out at 4:20 p.m. and made her way back out the back exit of the Canada Tire dressed in navy slacks, a white t-shirt, and a cardigan over the top, and green flats. All she had with her was her blue bag. On the day that Kim first went missing, her sister Erin tried to think of every rational possibility for her failing to show up when she was supposed to be picked up. She thought maybe Kim had gone back to the apartment early, but when she checked and found no sign that she had been there, she realized it was time to alert their parents, an incredibly difficult task. Kim's little sister Megan was at home at the time of this phone call.
Megan remembers it well. 16 at the time and living with her parents, she explained Erin's call to the Global News, saying, quote, "She asked for my dad on the phone. I knew something was wrong immediately. That's when she told my parents Kim hadn't come home from work." The Halifax Regional Police were contacted and Kim was reported missing. The search kicked off almost immediately, with investigators beginning in the area of Canadian Tire and working their way outward to try and track where Kim may have gone and anyone who may have seen her.
Kim's picture was shared on the news, and anyone who may have seen her on the day of her disappearance was urged to come forward with their information, as it could maybe at least provide information about which direction she may have gone. The public became divided in regards to opinions of what might have possibly happened.
While some believe she could have chosen to walk home, disappearing somewhere along the way, others argued that Kim had likely not left that parking lot of her own will. As the media got involved in the case within the first few days of the investigation, news of Kim's disappearance spread through Halifax and subsequently all of Canada rapidly.
As more and more people found out about the case, police started receiving tons of tips and even unconfirmed sightings of Kim from all around the country. These sightings were unfortunately ruled out as being Kim time and time again. But then a woman came forward who worked at the local flower shop, and she told police that she had seen a girl matching Kim's disappearance and that the girl had come into the flower shop to buy one rose and a balloon. This sighting piqued the police's interest because this sounded like it could actually be Kim. After all, it was her boyfriend's birthday that day, and it would make sense that she would have gotten these things for him. The only thing that may suggest this wasn't really Kim is the distance between the flower shop and her work. She would have had to have walked really fast to get to the flower shop at this particular point in time. That is, unless she was given a ride by someone, but who?
If she had left the store at exactly 4:20 when she got off and began her walk, she wouldn't even have made it to the flower shop until 5:30 at the earliest, and then she'd have to walk back. It would take her another hour to an hour and a half just to get to the store, let alone the additional 20 to 30 minutes walk to the apartment.
But that's not all. If Kim knew she was going to make the extra stop before getting picked up by her sister, it would make sense that she would have let her sister know ahead of time. This way, her sister would know why she was running late, but she had mentioned no such stop earlier that day. When you consider all of the details, it's pretty safe to assume that the girl at the flower shop had not been Kim after all. This misidentification was devastating for her family, who were desperate for any clues at all about what could have happened to her. The police combed the area for any sort of evidence that they could find, but were relatively tight-lipped about the progress they had made so far.
We've seen sifters and stuff like that leave here. How much longer do you expect to be here?
I'm not going to speculate on how long we're going to be here because, it's a complex investigation and it's going to take some time.
We've spoken with the McAndrew family, and they said they've been contacted. What can you tell us about the connection here to them?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to provide specifics of this investigation, and it's all part of the investigation. And again, it's not, we just don't want to speculate or.
Again, just some of the stuff that's being used to in this search. Can you just go into that again?
Cadaver dogs, forensic investigators, medical examiner's office, and the mini excavator.
Meanwhile, those who knew Kim tried to piece together their own conclusions about what could have possibly happened. Her family is certain that Kim did not run away, nor would she have even gone into the city on her own.
Megan told the CBC, quote, I used to make fun of her because she wouldn't walk to downtown Parsboro alone and would make me go with her to get a Diet Coke. That's not the personality of someone that has just gone off. In addition to Kim's disinterest in wandering off, nothing was missing from the apartment. No clothing, no personal items, nothing but the very clothes and items Kim had with her that Saturday afternoon.
But that is not all. Police checked financial records, and Kim hadn't accessed her account at all since her disappearance. Time went on, and police followed lead after lead, only to be disappointed each time. Eventually, Kim's face would unfortunately join a list of many others associated with unsolved disappearances in Halifax. There were a lot of theories as to what may have happened to her. Some thought she could have been abducted and brought into a human trafficking ring.
One tip, which came in early, suggested that Kim had been abducted by a local human trafficking operation tied to a man who had come to know her through her job. In his book, Somebody's Daughter, author Phonce Jessom explained how John Elliott, an investigator for the RCMP, was contacted by an informant who alleged that Kim had been picked up by the trafficker not far from her job that afternoon. Elliott brought this information to another investigator, Brad Sullivan, and together they enacted Operation Heart, which focused on tracking down a trafficking and forced sex work ring in the area.
They did not find Kim during this investigation, but they did make progress in bringing down suspects associated with trafficking. As they gathered more and more information, they came to suspect that if Kim had been trafficked, as soon as the abductors realized that her father was a police officer, they would probably have killed her. It would have been too risky keeping her around with so many people looking for her, especially considering how many connections her father had. As time passed on and the case appeared to grow cold, Kim's family were all growing the more desperate for answers. The reward that was started off as $5,000 for information about her whereabouts would go on to reach $150,000.
Tom Martin, who worked as an undercover drug officer at the time, became aware of Kim's case early on and did what he could to contribute. When asked about the early theories of the sex trafficking, Martin was somewhat dismissive, telling the Coast, quote, "Investigation 101, don't believe your informant too much." He felt that statement applied to the flower shop sighting as well, though he doesn't think in that case that it was done on purpose, it was just a mistake.
In 1991, Kim's family received what they thought was going to be the news they had been hoping for all of this time. An organization called Child Find Nova Scotia reported that Kim had been alive and that she was healthy and had just given birth to a baby in a London, Ontario hospital. Sadly, their hopes would be dashed yet again when they would receive confirmation that although the girl shared the same birthday as Kim, it wasn't really her.
In an interview with The Province, Kim's mother Audrey explained, quote, "At the beginning, we really weren't too sure it was Kimberly. Then you sort of listened to everybody else. All the media and Child Find kept saying it was Kimberly. So we thought, well, maybe it could be. Today, we're just extremely disappointed."
Unfortunately, Kim's body has still never been recovered. Her heartbroken father, Cyril McAndrew, spent the rest of his days on Earth desperately searching for her. Even when he got cancer, he continued to work towards finding justice. Ultimately, this did not happen during his lifetime, as Megan McAndrew would later say in an interview. Nobody has ever been charged in connection with Kim's disappearance, but throughout the years, there have been some individuals discussed as potential persons of interest. One would be Michael McCrae, a serial killer who is known to have killed at least 16 people between 1985 and 1998. He was arrested back in 1998 and was since sentenced to life imprisonment. Another possible suspect was Andrew Johnson, a convicted sex offender. He is behind bars. As for Kim's remaining family members, they still want to know what happened to her. It doesn't matter how much time has passed by. They might not expect to ever see her alive again, but they still want answers.
Judy Martin's disappearance is one that's full of questionable actions. Her story starts with her leaving her dorm room on the 24th of May in 1978. She attended Kent State University. Friends saw her leave her room, but remarked that Judy, who was 22 at the time, was wearing a Halloween costume. The costume included a wig, some jeans, a brown and yellow blouse, a trench coat and some glasses. After being out all night, she decided to head back to her room at around 2:30 in the morning. This was located at Engelman Hall, which shouldn't have taken long to get to from where she was last seen.
Judy was a fun, sweet, loving young girl with a bright future. Just like a lot of other college students do at the time, she had gone out for a night of good time with her friends, but she never ended up making it back home. The young woman, who had her whole entire life ahead of her, had just seemingly vanished without a trace, and nobody had any clue where she could be. Her personal items, such as her student ID, her makeup, and her glasses, were left in her room. These are things she would have needed while out and about on campus. She hadn't contacted her family, which was very unlike her. She would typically check in with them regularly. Judy was reported as a missing person by a fellow student on May 26th of 1978. The whole disappearance was a complete mystery. The police ended up calling the National Guard for help, and helicopters were flown over the area looking for any trace of her. They looked particularly close to local riverbanks, thinking that maybe if Judy had had too much to drink, she could have wandered off and fallen in. Still, they found no sign of her. Judy's parents arrived at the university to work with the police to find their daughter. They left one particular meeting with the administration at the university feeling discouraged. They believed that the school was more worried about avoiding bad press than they were about actually finding Judy. Police looked into one of Judy's ex-boyfriends, thinking he could be a person of interest.
He was put through a polygraph test, but the police said that he passed this with no issues. At this point, the police started to get desperate, and even brought a psychic on board who told them that Towner's Woods in Franklin is the place to look, further saying that that's where Judy's body lays.
That's right. Police followed the psychic's tip and looked for Judy in this area, but nothing was found. 2 years passed since Judy's disappearance, and the police received a very bizarre call from a county jail. The caller said that they had a woman there that looked strikingly similar to Judy, and even had the same birth date as her. The only problem was that the woman looked much older than Judy would have looked at that time. Judy's parents went to meet the girl, and this is where things get a little confusing. Judy's mother claimed that this girl was her daughter, but the father said it was not. It's possible Judy's mother wanted to believe that this girl was her child so badly that she convinced herself it was, when her father knew it wasn't. It was later determined that the father was right, and this was not really Judy. Judy's body was never found, and nobody was ever arrested in connection to the case. The family has no closure.
The police chief said the case of Judy Martin's is just bizarre, even though the case isn't solved. The majority of paperwork and files have been disposed of. This is due to record retention policies. As of today, investigators have no idea as to the whereabouts of Judy Martin's.
Judy's remaining family members are still dedicated to finding out what happened to her, even though they don't believe that she is still alive. Judy's father, Arthur, died from cancer at 57, and her mother, Dolores, died at 71. They died without ever knowing what happened to their beloved daughter. Judy's family still believes that her ex-boyfriend didn't have anything to do with her disappearance. There is one other possible person of interest. He is a prison inmate who took the lives of 2 girls around the time that Judy disappeared. He also lived a very short distance from the university. The 2 girls that he killed look similar to Judy, but he never confessed to her murder. Judy's family members have found the fact that they still have no answers to be the most painful part of all of this. They were also very disheartened to hear about Kent State destroying all of the records connected to the case, despite it having not been solved. It seems as if the university just wants to forget that this ever happened. Of course, for those that knew and loved Judy, it is impossible to ever forget. As of January of 2022, there have still been no updates in connection to the case. These have been the stories of 3 bizarre college student cold cases that have never been solved. For the sake of these young women and their surviving family members, we can only hope and pray that with more advanced technology and DNA evidence, answers will finally be found for these cases and justice is served. Remember, if you're a college student, always let people know what your plans are, and if you can help it, don't go anywhere alone, especially at night. Stay safe and good night.